started this project, I wanted to kind of make it generalized. But then as I did more research, I went more into San Francisco and rent control and how it is affected there. They're here. So on the agenda, first I'll go into the definition of rent control, and then kind of San Francisco before rent control and how rent was kind of used, and then I'll show a little short clip from this documentary on rent control, and then I'll show the effects of what high rent came with, and then I'll talk about rent control in San Francisco and how the rent control affects tenants and landlords, and then go into the just causes for eviction and where that applies, and rent increase types, and then we'll have a short little activity afterwards. So the definition of rent control is a government control over the amount of rent charged as per housing. And so here's like a little comic just to, you can read it if you want. So, yeah. So how has rent control affected San Francisco in the past? When I say San Francisco, I mean more of the tenants living in San Francisco. So here's a short clip from this documentary that I was watching.
Who owns a city? Who takes our homes? Use legislations and bankers' loans. They'll make a city no younger.
There's a new look to San Francisco. On the heels of the Manhattanization of downtown, speculation in housing is changing the face of the city. Rapid and repeated turnovers of residential property are driving up rents, and many San Franciscans find they can't afford to live in their own neighborhoods. The Mission District, one of the few low-rent areas left in the city, is currently a target for speculators. Attracted by low property values and proximity to downtown, speculators buy buildings cheap, make cosmetic repairs, and sell them quickly for huge profits. A recent survey of the Mission found that apartment buildings changed hands on an average of every 18 months, and the biggest profits were made when property was turned over in less than a year. Buildings are bought and sold to maximize profit without regard for their use.
I have a client who lives about a half block from here. A year ago, she paid $120 a month for rent. The latest rent increase that she got is to $300 a month. She had one owner for a real long time. The man sold his building to a new owner last summer, who subsequently sold sometime in late fall to the third owner. When the second owner took over in summer, he raised the rent from $120 to $180. And then the new owner raised it from $180 to $300. And like I said, there's no limitation on how much your rent can be increased. I had a group of people come in here who were living across town. I had 7 rent increases in the past year and a half.
Down speculation road.
So that gives a little bit of insight as to like what the tenants were like had to put up with before the introduction of rent control, and really like they were unable to kind of go against like or like have any limitations, so they kind of just had to move out of the city, or a lot of the former tenants became homeless just because they were unable to keep up with the prices of the rent and stuff, and so there are a lot of protests for rent control. And then on June 13th, 1979, rent control was passed by Mayor Dianne Feinstein, and so this really started to change rent in the city. So rent control does a lot for the tenants and the landlords. So for the tenants, they now have the ability to petition the rent board to decrease the rent. And they can only be evicted for one of the 16 just causes, which I'll get into a little bit later. And so for 60-day, or for rents higher than 10%, they, by law, have to receive a 60-day written notice, and then they have to, if it's lower than 10%, then they have to receive a 30-day written notice. And so for landlords, landlords are really like, can only raise the rent once annually based on the consumer price index for all urban consumers in the Bay Area. And so this is really kind of like touching on Sophie's presentation of inflation. So it really depends on like what what your money's worth and stuff. And so the 16 just causes for eviction, there's a lot. So the first one is non-payment of rent. So if you like frequently like forget to like pay your rent or something, then you can be evicted. And so if you have violated like a term of the rental agreements, then you can also be evicted. And like if you've done like substantial damage to your unit or something, evicted. Illegal use of the unit, termination of the rental agreement, refusing the landlord access to the housing unit, if you have an unapproved subtenant, and then if the landlord wishes to move in, then he has the right to evict you. Yeah, I mean, there's really like, it's, the reasons for eviction have been kind of condensed down to 16 rather than like, oh, like, you know, it used to be more uncontrolled. So where does rent control apply in the city? So it applies to houses built before 1979 when the law was passed. So if your house was built before then you have the protection of rent control. And so also if you live in a commercial zone, but your landlord knows that you live in the space and you communicate that with them, then rent control also applies to you. But it doesn't apply to houses built after 1979, and it doesn't apply to subsidized housing, which is like similar to Section 8 housing, religious facilities or dorms, and residential hotels where you stay less than 32 continuous days. So the one tricky thing about this is that single family homes really is kind of like a gray area of rent control. So rent controls do have the just cause eviction protection. And if you move into a single home which was vacant because the previous tenant was evicted, then you do have the rent control protection. If you move into a single family home or condo, and the housing code violations were uncorrected for at least 6 months before the vacancy, then you also have rent control protection. And if you live in a condo where the subdivider of the building still owns the condos, you have full rent control protection unless the last unsold unit and the subdivider lived in the unit for at least a year after subdivision. So where single family home rent control doesn't kind of protect you is you usually do not have a full rent control protection if you live in a single family home. If you're like in a condominium and you and your roommates moved in after January 1st, 1996. So the rent increase types, there's 5 that I brought, that I kind of like researched on. And so the first, of course, is the annual rent increase, which can be imposed once annually on the anniversary date. So basically, if I'm a landlord and I want to increase my rent for my tenants, then I can only do that once, say like March 1st or something like that. So I think on March 1st it was like 1.6%. And I wouldn't be able to change it until March 1st on the very next year. Yeah, or also I can hold the rent and change it at a later date than March 1st, and that would be considered the new anniversary date of the rent increase. Also, there is the 60-day notice that I mentioned earlier, which is state law, California Civil Code, Section 827. And then there's the PG&E pass-through, which is basically tenants who don't pay for the services of PG&E have to pay, have to like have an increased rent when their services, when PG&E's services go up. And it's kind of unfair to tenants because like they're already paying the utility increases as part of the annual rent increase. So they kind of like have to add on to these like extra costs and stuff. And then there's the operating and maintenance pass-through. And essentially, this is when a landlord wants to, you know, fix up the house or like maybe like install a new window or, you know, paint the outside of the house or something. They basically, yeah, so it's like basically anything that adds to the life or value of the property. And the increase, landlord expenses must exceed the annual rent increases. So if the annual increase of that year is like 2.2%, and the landlord's expenses increased 2%, then he would not be, like the landlord would not be eligible for the pass-through. And then lastly, there's the capital improvement rent increases. Oh man, I'm so sorry. So I got these mixed up. Basically, this one is the one where if I was to paint the house or whatever, it's very, very unfair just because the landlord can get the tenants to pay for it, and then the landlord can also write that off, write the cost of the improvements off in their taxes. So you're kind of put like the landlords are basically placing all their costs and stuff onto the tenants and stuff and forcing them to like really improve the house even though the landlord owns the property. So now I have a short activity. I'm gonna share this with you guys, and then if you could check your emails, that would be awesome. Essentially for this activity, it's really short, but I have 3 maps posted, and the first is kind of like highlighting the different districts in San Francisco. The second is talking about like the rent prices, like, you know, the red being very, very high, and then the green kind of just being like on the cheaper side of things, the cost. And then this last map is talking about the occupied housing stock subject to rent control. So if you guys look over the maps and stuff for a little bit of time, and then we'll have a short discussion as to why I think rent control would be more enforced in some areas rather than others. And also, like, just in general, what are the pros and cons of rent control and who is like benefiting from it. Yes.
Why is rent control not applied to houses built after 1970?
I'm not crystal clear on that, but I'm pretty sure it's just because like of the date when the law was passed. you guys need more time? Or? Okay. So, yeah, I guess, what do you think are the pros and cons of rent control? Anyone start?
Well, one thing that I noticed on the second map of this document is that there's like one green area right downtown where it should be orange or red, and I guess it's Chinatown, I would assume, or somewhere near.
No,
I don't
that's
think so.
no, Chinatown actually is the red area.
Right above it.
That green area is the western.
No, I don't
No,
think it's the Western Mission.
No, it's let's see, it's Civic Center plus
Lower Fulton,
Tenderloin
maybe.
plus.
It's like Civic Center.
Yeah, it's Civic Center and Tenderloin.
Oh, right. Well, one reason that might be is, I guess, or one good thing about that is that people aren't pushed out, so it would maintain a bit of the, like, community there, so people can, like, try to build a, community there.
People aren't pushed out yet.
Yeah.
I would say that there's a lot of homelessness in the Tenderloin, so maybe that can add to the lower prices just because it's less, wanted, just because of like the potential hazards when, mental, or just like homeless people, I don't know, mentally ill homeless people.
But it's interesting how Pack Heights and Russian Hill and Soma are in the red area as in most expensive, but then on the third picture it says that Soma is also like 2% to 42% rent control, so it's like that area has the least rent control when it's the most expensive.
But that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
it doesn't
it makes.
apply
First of
as
all,
to Pack
Soma
Heights.
has entirely been gutted and renovated, so every building in
Actually,
there
yeah.
is new. So they would not be under rent control, and because they're not under rent control, their rents are going to be higher.
I feel like rent control should apply to like every house though.
Well, but what would be the effect of that, though? What would be the effect of having rent control everywhere?
No investors to come in and build housing because they won't be able to make a profit out of it in their minds.
Yeah, it just sucks for those who live there then.
I'm looking at Alex Pack evictions thing. Basically, these circles kind of show where most evictions take place, and it's kind of like in the areas that have. I think up here is like the higher rent control or lower rent control areas, and down here is like the higher rent control areas. That's like Tenderloin-ish, right? Knob Hill up here.
Yeah.
And I think that's so just interesting how the circles are in places with less rent control.
Mm-hmm. And what happens? So if the building was under rent control, and the people get evicted, what happens to the status of the building after that? Does it lose its rent control status, or is it passed on to the next? Is it basically, are evictions just a means to just hike up the rent, or once you've lost your, once the people who are under rent control get evicted, do the next people get rent control but at a higher price, or do they just lose the rent control altogether?
I think how it works is, so it's less so than the people living there, cause it's more about the building itself, being under the regulations of rent control and stuff. So as long as the building was was built before 1979, then the next incoming tenants would still have those same kind of rules.
So it's still the same rules of rent control, except that you reset the rent price at whatever the market value is at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just gonna ask that.
Okay.
I was shocked by. It's so funny because I was looking at the map and looking at rent prices. I was shocked that Richmond and the Sunset were the lowest prices. Just because it doesn't look like it's
Yeah, it's very
right. I mean, the area where I live, they're not.
yeah.
They're nice houses. It's really interesting.
location, location, location.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's interesting that the Western Edition is higher priced than the Richmond. So based on your research, what do you think the impact is? What do you think?
The impact of rent control, it's really kind of like a slippery slope, I feel, just because you're kind of limiting how much the landlords are able to gain from their tenants and stuff in terms of rent, and you're allowing kind of like I'd say like a wider variety of people to move in, just because like, you know, the prices aren't skyrocketing anymore, but then that also like kind of affects the landlord's income, I'd say, and just kind of like the value of the area as a whole, because it's kind of like going lower when maybe you want to have your area be like more, I don't know, appear pricier or something, or like, yeah. So it kind of just negatively impacts that aspect, but then like for the people who are just trying to like live in San Francisco, then it benefits them. So.
Any other thoughts?
Yes,
Did you look at how state rent control laws influence how different cities can implement rent control?
like, did I look at other, I mean, because I mainly focused on San Francisco's, and then like the only state laws that were kind of brought up were the whole notices of like the 60 and like 30-day rent increases.
Because I know one of the things that San Francisco is going to try to challenge soon is the Costa-Hawkins Act, which basically prevents regulation decontrol. So what that means is basically the city wants to limit the amount landlords can increase the rent prices, but a state rent control law prevents them from doing that, from implementing
So
more
it's like
rent
going
control
at each
laws.
other.
So like that state law kind of trumps rent control here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they're going to try to do is either propose a proposition or file a lawsuit or something like that. I feel like that was pretty interesting to learn about how the state rent control law influences kind of what we can do here.
Yeah. But it really challenge like rent control as a whole.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.